From the moment the specialized training player side scheme was revealed in the X23 announcement article, many players, including myself, declared this an auto-include in every deck going forward forever from now on. After all, what's not to love about this card? It's basic, it only costs 1, and then once you remove 5 threat from it, you get to put into play one of the linked specialist upgrades that gives your hero either +1 attack, defense, or thwart, or +4 hit points, and then lets you draw a card for doing a very basic common action. Very little risk, incredible reward. Seems like a no-brainer, so let's just always save 1 spot in every deck we build from now on for this side scheme, right? Well, there might be a few reasons why you might choose not to include specialized training. For example, if you're playing a rush strategy, then you're not really going to have time to hang around and clear 5 threat from this when you're trying to end the game in 3 turns. And even if you're not playing rush, some solo games are just short enough that by the time you get this side scheme on the table, cleared, and get the upgrade in play, the game might be nearing its conclusion. Another reason why you might not always include this in your deck is there is a limit to the number of player side schemes that can be in play at a time. If you're playing 1 or 2 players, there's only allowed to be 1 player side scheme in play, and if you're playing 3 or 4, there's only allowed to be 2. And many of the other player side schemes might help you deal with a more pressing issue, giving them precedence. And if specialized training is taking up space on the board because it does require 5 threat per player, which is higher than all the rest of them, then this might be blocking you from playing another one that's more important. And finally, particularly for solo, aggression and protection aren't the best at removing threat. So depending on the hero you're playing, that 5 extra threat you're adding to the board just might never get cleared because you're probably struggling to keep up with what the villain is doing. Now, all those being said, speaking just for me personally, this is still practically an auto-include because I tend to play a lot of control decks, even in aggression and protection, that should have the time and ability to clear it, and I never play rush. So for my money, this is just about as close to an auto-include as it gets. But that does make me wonder, are there any actual true auto-includes in Marvel Champions? A card that you will just include in every single deck, no matter which hero you're playing, from now on, forever. Well, when the question is asked that way, then my answer is no. I don't believe there is a single card in Marvel Champions that belongs in every single deck, no matter the player count, no matter the hero chosen, no matter the scenario going up against. There are always enough variables to keep any card from being an auto-include, and that's a good thing. We wouldn't want there to be any cards constraining our creativity or imagination, making us feel like we always have to include this card or that card, or we're not building optimized decks. Now, that being said, I think there are quite a few cards that come really, really close to being auto-includes in the right situations. And that's what I really want to be talking about in this video. Cards that are practically auto-includes, because when we use that term, we don't necessarily mean it literally, but it's more just really, really good cards that are always at least considered for certain situations. And I think the obvious closest ones to that are, of course, the double resource cards. These do get included in probably 99% of Marvel Champions decks that get built. I know I pretty much always throw them in every deck without thinking too hard about it. Though there are a few situations you might choose not to include these. I've built some Drax protection decks that didn't include the doubles because the only cards I included were 0 and 1 cost protection cards, and his kit is already very cheap, so he doesn't really need them just for his cards. And you don't really want to be drawing these if you don't have something to play them with. Outside of that, maybe Star-Lord or Spider-Ham, people who can really generate resources very well on their own, might not need them in certain builds, but still, the vast majority of the time, I'm bringing these along, so these are probably as close to actual auto-includes as we get. But there is a handful of other basic cards that I feel like are also pretty darn close, and are good enough that they're likely at least considered for every single deck you build. Starting with the Helicarrier, there's very few reasons not to bring one of these along. You might just choose not to because you have other resource generators at your disposal. If you're a hero that can make good use of team building exercise or deft focus, those are cheaper options to the Helicarrier. But even just putting one Helicarrier in any deck is likely going to benefit you from time to time. So I think the Helicarrier is pretty close to potentially being an auto-include. because it really is just so useful, and especially in multiplayer. And keep in mind, everything I say is heavily solo biased, but especially in multiplayer, helicarriers on the board are super helpful. So I think those come pretty close to being auto-includes. There's also a handful of allies that I think are just so good, you're basically just choosing not to include them, being Ironheart, Nick Fury, Professor X, Mockingbird, and Blade. Every single one of these allies can do so much for you that the only reason I can think of to choose not to include them is largely down to theme. If you're playing an Avengers deck, for example, running things like Mighty Avengers and Avengers Tower, you don't want all these non-Avengers getting in the way because you want to be taking advantage of those bonuses. Similarly, the X-Men, you know, if you're wanting to play To Me My X-Men, if you're wanting to have Utopia out and everything you play is going to ready another X-Men, you don't necessarily want all of these in the way. But outside of that, just the sheer efficiency of Ironheart and Nick Fury with the card draw and the block is always, always helpful. Professor X giving a deck 3 thwart and a confuse to a non-stalwart villain is so, so helpful. Similarly, Mockingbird giving you that free stun and allowing you to have some stats for a couple turns before she takes a hit for you. And then Blade only costing 1, even if you never ever use his ability, only having to invest 1 resource into your defense for the turn is incredibly cheap, and it can go in any deck. So while there are a handful of reasons why these cards don't make it into every single deck, I think they just about could, and it really wouldn't hurt anything and would likely be very beneficial. So those are all the basic cards that I think come incredibly close to being potentially auto-includes for just about any deck, no matter what. I was only able to find 1 leadership card and 1 justice card that I think fit that bill, that being Maria Hill for leadership and Under Surveillance for justice, mainly for solo. I think if you're playing leadership and you're not running Maria Hill, the only reason is, again, because you're doing all X-Men or all Avengers or something like that. Because what she does for you for her cost, and again, especially in multiplayer, there are very, very few good reasons not to put her in any deck that can have leadership cards. And if you're running a solo justice deck, Under Surveillance, I usually don't even think twice. Now, if you are playing against a scenario that has one big scheme, like a Loki or a Thanos or a Hela, I don't necessarily bring it in those situations, and that's what keeps it from being considered a true auto-include. But outside of that, throwing one of these on the main scheme just gives you so much freedom and peace of mind and breathing room that I pretty much always bring one of these in almost every single justice deck I build. So that's the closest I've come to any true auto-includes in decks that can take them. But I think there are a lot of situations where there are cards that are practically auto-includes every time for certain heroes or in certain themes. For example, if you're playing a certain trait, you might always want to have certain cards. If I'm playing the Mystics, Adam Warlock, Doctor Strange, and Scarlet Witch, I can tell you I'm always including Sorcerer Supreme, and I'm always bringing all the copies of Spiritual Meditation I can. 3 for these guys and 1 for him. Those cards are so good, and you can only use them while playing Mystics. I consider those auto-includes every single time I play those heroes. Similarly, the Mystic spells that are available in each aspect come really, really, really close. If I'm playing Adam Warlock, I'm likely playing all 4 of these every single time. And if I'm playing Doctor Strange or Scarlet Witch, it only takes up 1 spot in your deck, and the effects are so useful that I'm almost always guaranteed to include whichever aspect that I'm running, I'm going to bring that spell with me. And when it comes to Doctor Strange, Cosmo used to be an auto-include, but unfortunately, thanks to the 1.5 errata, no longer. Now, while the Mystic trait cards definitely verge on auto-include territory for me, interestingly, I don't know if the Psionic cards do. These are all really interesting cards, but I think they're a little bit more deck dependent. So if I am playing Phoenix and with the upcoming Cable and Psylocke, I don't know that I'm always including these every single time. For example, Psychic Kicker, if I'm not running a lot of allies, and you're playing leadership, so likely you are, but this is still a card that you have to sort of build the deck around. This doesn't necessarily go in every single leadership deck, as opposed to the Mystic cards. Those cards are just so ubiquitously useful. It doesn't matter what kind of deck you build, you might as well bring them. And I think that's true for all of these. Psychic Assault is pretty universally useful. unless you're going against a steady or stalwart villain, is not as good. Psychic Misdirection. There's just so many good protection cards that this one might not always be the best choice if there's not going to be consistent other enemies for you to redirect the attack to. And Psychic Manipulation, while very, very good, is also kind of pricey. So the Mystic cards are probably a little too good. They're a little too auto-include. I think the Psionic cards are a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more interesting, and so aren't necessarily auto-includes, which again is probably a good thing. Another common theme in Champions that might lead to some auto-includes are the heroes who like to flip a lot. They're likely going to bring Lay Down the Law, Surprise Attack, Perseverance, or Moxie. Whichever aspect they're running, if I'm playing a hero that can use those, like Vision, or Wasp, or Shadowcat, Spectrum, Ant-Man, someone who's likely to be changing forms very frequently, particularly while staying within hero form. You could also consider these for heroes like Ms. Marvel that like to go to Alter Ego and back frequently, but these truly shine in heroes that can change form and stay in hero form. You're probably going to be including these in any deck that you build with these heroes, making them very close to being auto-includes. But there, again, are situations where you might not. Like Kitty doesn't really need Perseverance. She's so good at preventing damage anyway. The Tufts aren't as useful. Now, you still might choose to bring it, but it's a little bit less useful than, say, for Ant-Man, who would really, really love those. And Moxie, I think, only makes it into leadership builds where there's at least a decent amount of readying involved. Spending this resource to play this card just for the one activation, if you're not planning on readying your hero, isn't always as great either. Lay Down the Law and Surprise Attack probably make it into every Justice and Aggression deck for these heroes because they're just so efficient for the cost. So I think those are really, really close to being auto-includes for these heroes and maybe could be called auto-includes. But Perseverance and Moxie, I think there are a few more considerations for those two. For me, Limitless Stamina is pretty much an auto-include in every hero that can include them. So Colossus, Drax, Hulk, She-Hulk, Thor, and SPDR, all heroes that can make use of a ready for only one resource. That's pretty much an auto-include for me. I've rarely built decks with these heroes that don't include 3 copies of Limitless Stamina. Particularly in Everybody But SPDR, they really want to make use of their very high attack stats that they can get up to. And SPDR has so many options of all the different ways she can use her basic activation, and she has a lot of readies anyway, that I tend to play her with a very stat boost and ready style just built in. So having 3 more readies for 1 seems really good. Though I think if anybody doesn't need it, she's probably the closest one that maybe I wouldn't consider an auto-include for because she can already ready so easily. But for these 5, I don't know that I would ever build a deck without 3 copies of Limitless Stamina. So I think this is really, really close to being considered an auto-include. Another card that's pretty much an auto-include for me and any heroes that can bring it is Ever Vigilant. And mainly, I mean the heroes that have access to aerial pretty much from the beginning of the game or can get it incredibly easy. Like Ironheart, who gets it at level 2, and then Thor gets it from the hammer. Spectrum has it naturally. Nova gets it from his helmet. And Rogue can very easily access aerial by putting Touched on an ally. Ever Vigilant is just such a good card. Protection wants that threat removal anyway, and hero readying is always useful. Ironheart, Thor, Spectrum always have exceptionally good stats. Rogue can get really good stats, particularly with her jacket. And Nova, every time you ready him, that's another time you can exhaust him so that you can get another use of the helmet. So all of these heroes make really, really good use of the readies, and Protection always wants that threat removal. So if I'm playing one of these heroes in Protection, I guarantee you 99.9% of the time, probably 100, I am bringing Ever Vigilant, making that an auto-include in the right situations. I think Web of Life and Destiny and Go for Champions are pretty much auto-includes for Web Warriors and Champions decks. Web of Life and Destiny does require allies to be useful, so it doesn't just automatically work with the heroes, but the Web Warrior allies are so good that if you are playing a hero that can use them, I think it's unlikely that you're not taking advantage of those awesome Web Warrior allies. And if you are, then this is just so easy to throw into a deck and draw a bunch of extra cards when they leave play. And Go for Champions, particularly with the errata, I think actually makes this card more attractive. Before, it just felt like a degenerate strategy to have that in your deck, and for some players, that's not very interesting. But now that it's errated to remove itself from the game after you play it, I think having this in every champion deck and then just using it on the turn where it makes the most sense is something that should just likely happen for every champion deck. So I think these are both incredibly, incredibly close to being considered auto-includes for the heroes that can use them. I mentioned the Helicarrier towards the beginning of this video, and one reason I think you might choose not to bring one of those is if you're playing a hero that can make really good use of Def Focus. Heroes like Quicksilver, Groot, Shadowcat, Storm, Vision, Spider-Woman, Adam Warlock, Colossus, Rogue, Spectrum, so many. These heroes have so many superpowers in their deck that including a Def Focus to help pay for those is such a cheap resource generator that you'd be really unlikely not to include one of these every time you're playing one of these heroes. So I think this definitely could be considered an auto-include whenever you're playing any of these. Not quite as cheap and not quite as ubiquitous, but I think for the right heroes, team building exercise becomes an auto-include. The main ones I'm thinking of are Spider-Ham, where it helps pay for Cartoon and Web Warrior cards. Phoenix, where it helps pay for Psionic and X-Men cards. Ant-Man can use it to pay for Giant, Tiny, and Avengers cards. And Thor can use it to pay for Asgard and Avengers cards. So those are 4 heroes who can make really good use of team building exercise just within their own kits. Of course, many heroes can use it if they happen to be running a strategy where they are an Avenger hero with a lot of Avenger allies and such. But as far as heroes that I always consider including team building exercise, and pretty much always do include team building exercise, are these 4, because you can get so much work out of it, and 2-cost resource generators are nicer than 3-cost resource generators. So if I can take one of those instead of, or in addition to, a Helicarrier, that is going to greatly improve my economy. Endurance is a card that might be considered an auto-include. After all, for only 1 resource, you get 3 extra hit points, so it basically functions like a good protection event and is rarely not going to be useful. But for me, it is an auto-include anytime I'm playing Drax, Spider-Ham, or Venom, just because these are heroes that want to be making use of their health pools to fuel what they're trying to do. So getting 3 extra health for only 1 resource is very worthwhile bringing in every single one of the decks I build for those heroes. And Rocket and Hawkeye might just always want one to help with their very low health pools and very few ways to defend themselves. One element many heroes happen to possess is having access to a really, really good defense card. And anytime I'm playing one of those heroes, I always bring Jocasta if I'm playing protection. For me, she is a guaranteed include anytime I'm playing protection with Vision, with Venom, Valkyrie, now that that has been errated to have the defense trait, Storm, Spider-Man, Spectrum, Shadowcat, Rogue, Ms. Marvel, Gamora, Gambit, Drax, and Captain America all have incredible defense events. Some of these are those heroes' best cards. And Jocasta is just one more way to play that card again every deck pass. So I find her to be just this side of an auto-include when I'm playing about a third of the heroes in the game if I'm playing them in protection. So those are all the cards I find to be auto-includes in many situations. But there are a few other times where certain cards become auto-includes if I'm playing certain heroes. For example, if I'm playing Black Panther, I always bring Avengers Mansion and I always bring Lockjaw. These 2 cards make into every Black Panther deck I build because he has those 3 Vibraniums. He has a lot of extra resources. And once he gets his Wakanda upgrades on the board, your second deck pass, sometimes you draw way more resources than you need. So Lockjaw makes for a really nice card to have in your discard pile to make use of those extra Vibraniums laying around. And Avengers Mansion is so easy to get on the table because he has so many resources and he wants cards to go with those resources that I always bring these 2 cards when I'm playing Black Panther. I don't think it's too surprising that if you're playing Black Widow, Injustice, Agent Coulson is a guaranteed deck slot. There's just no reason why you wouldn't choose to bring him. He's solid anyway, but the fact that he can go get any preparation card for Black Widow makes him a definite auto-include in any Widow Justice deck. For me, anytime I'm playing Captain Marvel, I always bring a Quinn Carrier because that wild resource is a guaranteed way to fuel her rechannel ability, making that an auto-include. And thanks to the Alpha Flight Station in her kit having the shield trait, I also always bring along Agent 13 because I think having her there to ready the Alpha Flight Station and get a second use of it is worth it, even if that's the only shield card in the deck. And the fact that Agent 13 can thwart for 2 4 times makes her a worthwhile include anyway. Yarnborn always makes the cut anytime I'm playing Quicksilver or Captain America in Aggression. Having these guaranteed physical resources on the board, sometimes you just have these left over depending on how the turn played out. It's nice to have Yarnborn on the table to make use of that leftover physical resource. So I think that's an auto-include for those two heroes when they're playing red. For me, Ironheart never leaves home without Moon Girl. The fact that she can be played in hero or alter ego, and Ironheart is the only hero that can do that with her right now, means that Moon Girl makes it into every single Ironheart deck I build. She's pretty much an auto-include for me in Wasp and some other heroes that have the Genius trait, as well as the other champion heroes that can play her in hero side. But for Ironheart, it's 100% of the time Moon Girl is coming along. Similar to what I said about Captain Marvel, Iron Man always has a Quincara handy to guarantee that he can go into aerial anytime he needs to. I don't build a lot of Iron Man decks, but if I did, they would always include Quincarrier. Clarity of Purpose feels like a card that was custom designed for Spider-Ham, so if I'm playing Spider-Ham in Leadership, and I often do, then I'm definitely bringing at least one, possibly two, and occasionally 3 copies of Clarity of Purpose in every single Leadership Spider-Ham deck I build. And just a couple more, Crew Quarters makes it into every single Miles Morales deck I build just because he can easily access it with his double life card, making it really simple to just go down to Alter Ego, heal for 1 before he pops back up. Incredibly useful. And why wouldn't you include Reboot in every single Vivian deck, making it very easy to access her 3 thwart or 3 attack a second time for only 1 resource. And I suppose you could use it on Vision 2 if you wanted to. So when thinking about auto-includes, those are all the cards that came to mind for me. Cards that see a lot of play on my table and are guaranteed to be included in the situations I described. But I want to hear from you. Which cards do you always include in certain situations? Do you have any cards that you put in every single deck you build no matter what? If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And I look forward to seeing you next time we get up in game. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.